In the high desert of California, there is a town where the streets are empty. The wooden buildings stand against violent winds, and the interiors of old homes still look as though their owners simply stepped outside and never returned. More than a century ago, thousands of people came here chasing gold, building families, businesses, churches, and dreams. They believed they were creating permanent lives in the mountains. But Bodie would eventually become one of America's most famous ghost towns. And among its silent buildings remains a lesson about the things people carry quietly inside their hearts, the hopes they never announce, the fears they never share, and the faith that sometimes gives them strength when no one else can see the struggle. The story of Bodie began in 1859 when gold was discovered in the area by Waterman S. Bodie. The mining settlement that developed around the discovery eventually took his name. For years, Bodie remained relatively small. Then everything changed in the 1870s. In 1875, a mine cave-in revealed a rich vein of ore. The Standard Company purchased the mine, and news of the discovery spread rapidly. Prospectors, miners, merchants, laborers, families, and adventurers rushed toward the remote mountain settlement. By the late 1870s, Bodie had become a genuine boomtown. Wooden buildings appeared across the high desert. Hotels opened, general stores supplied miners, saloons filled the streets, churches and public buildings became part of the growing community. At its height, Bodie had thousands of residents and more than 2,000 buildings. California State Parks notes that the 1880 census recorded 5,275 residents, while estimates for the boom years reached considerably higher. People came from across the United States and from countries around the world. They brought different languages, different traditions, different beliefs, and different reasons for being there. But beneath all those differences was something they shared. Almost everyone had come because they wanted a better future. For some, that future meant wealth. For others, it meant paying debts. For some families, it meant escaping poverty. And for others, it simply meant having enough money to build a quiet life somewhere far away from the struggles they had known before. But life in Bodie was never easy. The town stood high in the Sierra Nevada, where winters could be brutal. Strong winds swept through the streets. Snow could isolate the settlement. Mining was dangerous, and the promise of gold could disappear as quickly as it appeared. Behind the excitement of the boomtown were thousands of private struggles. A miner could spend months underground and still return home with little money. A mother could worry about her family's future while her husband worked inside a dangerous mine. A shopkeeper could wonder whether tomorrow's customers would still have money to spend. A young person could look across the mountains and wonder whether the life they were building would actually last. Most of those thoughts were never recorded. History usually remembers the gold. It remembers the mines. It remembers the population. It remembers the buildings. But it rarely records the quiet thoughts people carried home at night. That may be one of the most human parts of Bodie's story. People were surrounded by thousands of others, yet many of their deepest worries were completely private. They worked, they prayed, they hoped, they waited, and they continued. Bodie reached its peak quickly, but the boom did not last. By 1881, the town had already begun entering decline. Rich deposits became harder to exploit. Mining companies struggled, and people started leaving for places where they believed better opportunities existed. By 1886, the population had fallen dramatically. Yet Bodie did not disappear immediately. New technology and renewed investment produced periods of additional mining activity. Electricity and the cyanide process helped revive parts of the industry during the 1890s. A smaller population remained, trying to keep the community alive. But the larger dream of Bodie could not be restored forever. The 20th century brought further decline. By the early 1900s, the Great Rush was over. Families left. Businesses disappeared. The streets became quieter. The buildings that had once been surrounded by voices slowly became surrounded by wind. Then, in 1932, another devastating fire destroyed much of what remained. California State Parks reports that the fire reduced the surviving structures to less than 10% of the town's original 2,000 buildings. Still, a small part of Bodie survived. Mining continued on a limited scale until 1942, when mining officially ceased. Afterward, only a handful of caretakers remained. Eventually, the town became a place visited more for its history than for its gold. In 1962, Bodie was designated a state historic park and national historic landmark. Instead of rebuilding it into a modern tourist attraction, California chose to preserve the surviving town in what became known as a state of arrested decay. The interiors of many buildings were left as they had been, creating an extraordinary glimpse into the lives of people who once called the mountain settlement home. Today, visitors can walk along Bodie's deserted streets and look through windows into old homes and businesses. A chair sits where someone once rested. A bed remains inside an old room. Shelves still hold objects from another era. A church stands quietly against the mountain landscape. And suddenly, the ghost town does not feel completely empty. It feels personal. Because behind every abandoned building was once a human being. Someone who had plans for tomorrow. Someone who worried about money. Someone who missed home. Someone who loved another person. Someone who had a secret hope they may never have spoken aloud. Someone who believed their life would turn out differently. The people of Bodie could not see the future. Neither can we. They did not know that their booming town would eventually become nearly silent. They could not imagine strangers walking through their abandoned streets more than a century later. They could not know that their ordinary lives would one day become history. But perhaps that is exactly why Bodie still feels so powerful. It reminds us that the future is always uncertain. We may plan carefully. We may work hard. We may dream about tomorrow. But there are parts of life we cannot control. And when those moments arrive, the deepest things inside us become important. The hope we protect, the faith we hold, the quiet prayers nobody else hears, the strength we discover when there is no audience watching. Bodie disappeared as a thriving town, but it did not disappear from history. Its abandoned streets became a record of ordinary people who once believed tomorrow would look differently. Today, the wind moves through the same streets where miners once walked. The mountains remain, the buildings remain, and the silence seems to ask a question that is still relevant more than a century later. What do you hold inside your heart when nobody else knows what you are going through? Perhaps the answer is different for every person. For some, it is hope. For some, it is faith. For some, it is a dream they refuse to abandon. And sometimes the words we never say to another human being are the very words we quietly offer to the Creator. Bodie reminds us that history is not only about gold, mines, railroads, and abandoned buildings. It is also about people. People who struggled. People who hoped. People who prayed. People who kept going without knowing how their story would end. And perhaps that is why the silent streets of Bodie still matter. Because the town may have lost its population, its mines, and its future as a booming community. But the human emotions that once filled those buildings never really became old. The gold disappeared. The crowds disappeared. The businesses disappeared. But hope remains. And somewhere beneath the cold California sky, the forgotten streets of Bodie continue to whisper a timeless truth. Some of the deepest words in a person's heart are never spoken to the world. They are simply carried quietly and entrusted to the Creator.